So this is just not really so much a news story as just an interesting circumstance that I thought we could discuss a little bit more. So when this generation was being announced, or maybe not when it was being announced, but then early on before it actually started, we started figuring out like, okay, what's going to be the offering from Sony and from Microsoft, and their whole kind of two model strategy that each side was going for. On the PlayStation side, it was the version with the disc drive and the version that's all digital, doesn't have the disc drive. But outside of that difference, they're the exact same machine, exact same specs, exact same power, all that kinds of stuff. Mm-hmm. And then we got on the Microsoft side, they introduced a similar situation where it's like two different machines is what they're going to launch with. We had the Series X, which was all the bells and whistles, has a disc drive.
The flagship.
Yeah, the flagship, if you will. Right. The most powerful version that you can get. And then the Series S, which was minus the disc drive, it was smaller, and had some hardware limitations that made it to where it just wasn't quite hitting as much power as the Series X is. But for most of the other things, it was very similar. Like it had the same SSD, the same speed, read and write, and all that kind of stuff. So if you guys remember, back when that was kind of being announced, there were some murmurings and some from people, and actually Jason Schreier, I believe, had put out an article where, you know, he oftentimes has anonymous sources or people that don't necessarily want to be on record, but he was posting some stuff from some developers that he'd been speaking to that were like, I kind of feel like this is going to become a problem because it's going to hamper our abilities to, like, we're wanting to move into this new generation, really hit all these ideas and designs we have, and we have some concerns about, is this Series S going to kind of limit us from being able to do that? Because Microsoft had a policy, and I think they technically still have this policy, but it's that games that launch on their platform have to be able to launch with all the same modes on both machines. Now, you don't have to hit every performance metric the same between them two, but they have modes in particular is one they have to have it on both. And that's become a little bit of an issue because Baldur's Gate 3, which launched on PC, and is slated to launch, I think, in a week or couple weeks on PlayStation 5, but they hadn't committed to. They said, we're working on an Xbox version, but they hadn't committed to when that's going to happen and when that's going to come. And it came out that the game director was basically saying, like, look, the problem is there's this cap on their platform where it's like they have to hit these, and we can't make this split screen mode that we're offering work on Series S. We're running into a lot of problems with it, and we can get on Series X, but we can't get on there, so we're just delaying it and pushing it further while we work to try to figure something out. Well, at Gamescom this last week, you know, Phil Spencer was out there, and he talked with a lot of different people and a lot of different developers and whatnot, and so the game director for Baldur's Gate 3 came out and said, okay, look, we talked with Phil Spencer and we reached kind of like an agreement. The Series X will not feature split screen co-op, but it will have the cross save progression and all that kind of stuff between Steam and Series X. So the question came up, it was like, okay, so Phil, is the Series S becoming a problem? And do you see a future where it goes away or it changes in some way? Because there have been murmurings that Sony is likely going to follow suit with how they did it in the last generation and have like a mid-gen refresh where they'll have like, we'll just say
have a
PS5 Pro. Something like that coming out. And the Microsoft side, ever since those murmurings started, the Microsoft side has come out and pretty much said like, hey, you know, no, we're not doing mid-gen refreshes. We're sticking with our two version strategy that we're going forward with. So it was an interesting situation. Because Microsoft, or Phil Spencer specifically, was saying, you know, I don't see a world where we drop the S in terms of parity. I don't think you've heard that it's been a problem from us or from Larian, who is the game director for Baldur's Gate 3, which isn't exactly accurate because he is the one who came out and said, yeah, man, we can't hit this thing. But he said that Phil Spencer felt that was more of like a commentary that's coming from the community. He's like, there are features that ship on X today that don't ship on the S, even from our own games that we make, like ray tracing that works on the X, but not the S. But I don't think that's been the problem so much. It's been more about it has to have feature parity. And I guess you could say that ray tracing is a feature, but that doesn't change your game. That's just more like more bells and whistles on the pretty picture. That's almost like resolution.
Which you would expect.
Yeah, because the Series S on a lot of games has a hard resolution cap, like because it can't go out to a certain amount. But the X may go higher than that. And that's not been a problem because that wasn't the issue. The issue was more about having to make sure that you have feature parity across the games. And then Phil Spencer had another comment that was a little bit interesting because he's basically doubling down on, we're going to keep the Series S. Right now, what we're really working on is increasing storage, as we know that they're about to release a new version of it that has a 1 terabyte SSD, which the one that launched only had a 512. And he's like, we're going to stick with the strategy. We like that idea. And I understand that strategy from a standpoint of having a cheaper entry price of some people to get in. Because, especially these days, lots of stuff is really expensive. But I found it interesting because he then was asked about, the rumors of Sony introducing a mid-gen refresh. And he was like, I don't want to do that. He's like, the minute you introduce mid-gen refreshes, now developers have all these games they have to play where they have to figure out which SKU are they going to target as their baseline. And then they have all these other ones to do. He's like, it starts looking more and more like PC. I was like, well, yes, that's true. And I understand that. And I think there's a conversation to be made even between us, even if we wanted to have it about, does mid-gen refreshes even make sense? It's like, but you kind of introduced that same scenario when you had two different SKUs that were less power than the other. So from out the gate, you introduced that problem. Mid-gen refresh would increase it, obviously, but it's like, but the problem is still the problem regardless of where you go.
Well, and it's weird considering they've done it.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, not only with this, but obviously with the 1X last generation. And so it's not like they're like, we don't want to do it. We feel like it offers. It's like, unless they found problems with that.
Well, while he didn't say it in so many words, I think the context leads you to kind of surmise that what he's getting at is like, hey, we went down that road. We didn't like it because of these reasons. So this time we're not going to do it. That's kind of what I'm surmising. He didn't say that specifically, but I think that would kind of be his stance, is like, we did this. We found issues with it, and these are roughly some of the issues with it, the whole SKU thing. But I think most developers, while that will, when you introduce something that's more powerful mid-gen, that does introduce the older things, they don't get less powerful, but they just seemingly do because the new stuff's stronger. That that adds that problem, but I think developers are never going to be upset with you giving them more power. It's when they introduce less from the get-go that's where they become the problem. And I don't know, it was just an interesting situation because I completely see and understand the reasoning and the justification and the rationale of why the Series S exists. And there's a lot of people in our community, in our Discord, and all of our socials that are rocking an S, and it's perfect. It works great for them. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people that are excited about this new version where they're going to be able to have a baseline higher SSD, even though all the models have had the ability to add expansion SSDs. I don't know. I was curious what you guys thought. Like, does the fact that the Series S exists and that Microsoft doesn't seem to be into the whole mid-gen refresh thing, which it seems like Sony at the moment, just rumorville, but it seems like they are going to do that again. Like, what are you guys thinking? Like, I know, Tim, you had kind of toyed with the idea of possibly looking at this new Series S that's going to drop here in a little while. I mean, what do you guys think?
I was never going to get the Series X. I was going to get the S because as long as it could play the games that I wanted it to play, that's great. Mm-hmm. But what you're saying in this situation is that the S can't play this game, right? And so the X is the one that you would have to use to play because it doesn't.
It can play the game. It's there, but it's not going to have. It's going to be missing some gameplay features that the X version can play that are not just like, resolution or frame rate cap. It's going to be actual things that I can do on this game that are not doable on this one.
Okay. Which what Microsoft wants to avoid.
Yes.
Right. Because
it makes total sense why they would want to avoid that. It makes absolute sense.
Absolutely. They're we can't have split screen be available on this Call of Duty and not on this one.
That's
right. You know what I'm saying? For lack of a better.
That's my thing. It's like, well, then, if it can't do that, then maybe you do need to do some sort of a mid-gen refresh on the S to beef it up and make it more powerful.
But you can't. Like, you can't go in between the S and the X.
That's right.
Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's like you have to go S, X, and then something beyond the X.
Yeah. The X Pro or something. Who knows?
It's so crazy because as Microsoft, as you're launching this, you had to have thought that this was going to be a problem.
Right.
I think, right?
But then, like, you're just like, it'll be fine. Game Pass is our thing anyway, so we're just going to make a Game Pass machine, and then we're going to make, this, and it'll be fine. But then when you do have these third parties that are like, yo, we can't get this to work right.
Yeah.
Like for the game. And that will only continue to happen,
Yes.
like Chris is saying, as the power gets pushed down the field a little bit. Especially, it'll be exacerbated if the PS5 does a refresh and makes their thing even more powerful.
That's
so
right.
then you have like the way stronger thing than even the X, and then people are starting to push. Now, I never did the jump in the PS4 era. I never
That's
did
right.
the
You
jump
stayed
to
with
the
the
Pro.
Pro, right? I had the Pro.
Yeah, and I never felt it.
Yeah.
And I never felt like I wasn't able to play a game that I could have been able to play. And this is the same, except if it's your only console.
Right.
Now, we here, all four of us, I'm going to lay it out. We have the incredible blessing of having multiple consoles, right?
Yes.
And so the Xbox that I have is the Series X. And then I have the PS4 and the PS5, PS4 for the kids, and I've got the 5. And so, but if you only had the S, which you should, I don't think
That should
many
be an
households don't
option.
need more than
Yeah,
one console. That should be an option to just have the one. And so it's a little buggy if and just because you brought it up, Chris, with it being split screen. If all of a sudden you can't play a game couch co-op, that's an issue.
I'm out.
That's a major issue.
Absolutely.
And I'm not saying that's what's going on with Baldur's Gate, but just in the future, if other games are like, we can't do this split screen on the S, that's not good. That's bad, considering that's going to be some people's only console.
What's sad is that's kind of been Xbox's thing. Like with Halo, they were like, it'll have couch co-op, and it came out and it's like, yeah, actually, it's not. Even on the X,
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's if the S is the reason that you can't, but it's just that
Right.
seems to be their thing lately. Is couch
You have
co-op
to.
is their
You have to feel like
They would have done that. Yeah.
I mean, nobody said that. I haven't seen any leaks from developers being like, "Man, we can't do it because of this." I don't recall seeing that, but you have
I
to.
don't
You
either.
start putting all these puzzle pieces together, and you start building a picture of oh, this is likely. Well, of course, you don't know. It's just speculation, but it's like,
Yeah, but you also it's from in house. So with Halo, you know what I'm saying? It's like, hey, we're gonna do split screen, and you're like, okay. They're like, we're not gonna do it actually. You're like, why? Cause, and you're like, nah, why? Yeah, and it might be because it couldn't run good on the S.
So,
It's
Gabe,
just-
you're
it's-
saying
it's
that. Go ahead.
No, go ahead, Tim.
I was going to say, you're saying that if they were going to do a mid-gen refresh, the X now becomes the middle console and there's something above that. Not the S does like an S Plus and it's somewhere in the middle.
Right. I'm saying they would have to do something beyond the X, which would make the S even more obsolete. And that's
way
a
more
bummer
expensive.
because
This X Plus would be more expensive.
Right, but we've never had a current gen be obsolete.
Right.
That's a problem.
Yes, that is
You
a
can't
problem.
say I'm putting out these two things: the flagship Series X, the family-friendly, budget-friendly Series S. Then we're going to do a refresh, and then games are going to come out on just these two top ones.
Nope.
right.
Now, they won't do full games. It won't be like, and no game is coming out on the S. But if the features get so hefty
Exactly.
that they're like, sorry, this major feature can't run on the S, that's an issue. Or, hey, the S gets the cloud version.
Right.
And, you know what I'm saying? Stuff like that. And you're like, kind of like with the Nintendo Switch, where it's like they got the cloud version of Hitman. Even though it's like, we're bringing Hitman to Switch. You're like, oh, sweet. Like the cloud version. You're like, dang it.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. I just think that's a problem.
I think the issue really lies with, because I understand their strategy and the way that they went, and I feel like in certain respects, maybe even the most respects, it makes total sense to have that strategy.
Yeah.
The problem comes down to, in my opinion, this requirement that there's feature parity between the models. What they should have done from the beginning, and maybe they need to transition to.
They could always change it.
Yeah, what they need to transition to is look, the Series S is the budget model that has limitations.
Yikes.
Dang
But
it.
it'll get a lot of stuff, but it may not get everything. And then if you want the best of the best, in the console world from our offerings, it's the Series X, assuming there's no mid-gen refresh. Now that's going to be painful, especially right now, because then it looks like you did a bait and switch with all these people who've bought in so far.
That's right.
Yes. But if they'd have done that from the beginning, and I would make the case that even if you do it now, like rip that Band-Aid off, at least people moving forward know. I mean, not everybody, the moms and pops that are just going in like, what should I buy little Timmy? They're not going to know because it's not going to say on the box, compromised console. It's not going to say that.
Console.
But the people who are in the know are going to make that. They're going to then say, okay, right. Do I buy what works in my budget, or do I wait and save a little bit longer? They're going to have an informed decision that they can make. I think that's what they should do, because I do think there's value in the Series S. But if they're going to continue with this parity requirement, that's going to become a problem, and
it's going to hurt them third party especially.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, and also don't forget, hey, you could go a little bit more, and you have just this one console over here on Sony that handles everything and can do everything. And if they do a mid-gen refresh,
I know, but just those some of those games that are first party that people love. You know what I'm saying? 'Cause it's not like you get Halo over
but
there.
But I'm thinking of the mom who's getting Timmy the Christmas present.
Oh yeah, that doesn't know anything.
They don't know anything, but you have one console over on this side, and you have value and flagship on this other side. And I appreciate that they want to be able to have that option available. But if that's going to start hindering me, for me personally, if that's going to start hindering me from playing games to their potential, I'm out.
It's tough, man.
It will be interesting too to see, like, does Sony, I think it's for sure they are going to introduce something, but it'll be interesting. Is it going to be more powerful, or is it just going to be this version where, because there's been all this rumor about not even that, but then there's been this heavy rumor for a while now that they're going to make a model where it's a single model, and if you want the disk drive, you can buy it and then plug it in, like it attaches on. Maybe that's all that the mid-gen refresh is. Maybe they feel like the power's fine, and it's just this more modular version and down to a single SKU rather than selling 2 SKUs. And then it's not really an issue. But if they come out with a mid-gen refresh and it's more powerful, it's like you still have this problem, Microsoft.
Yeah.
I mean, because this has been introduced, whether you play that game or not, that exists in the market.
Yeah,
that's the new standard.
It sounds like it just makes it more apparent, because it sounds like the problem's going to happen regardless.
Yeah.
Regardless if Sony does a mid-gen, it's a problem right now.
Right.
And Sony hasn't done a mid-gen refresh.
And developers want to push the limits to what they can do. If they're going to give them more power, they're going to take it. They're going to use it. But Gabe, I like what you said. And just because I'm more of a PlayStation person, but with the 4, you had the PlayStation 4 the whole time. And
the whole time,
you could play all your games, and it was great. I had the 4,
have it.
Yeah, I have the 4 Pro, still have that too. Same thing. The fact that they had a console that spanned all the different technologies for all the different games was brilliant. I thought, I mean, that isn't that how it should be done? Like, I understand what Microsoft is doing, and that they're trying to like broaden everything and make it easier for people who may not be able to get the X. But if you can't play the same game, you're losing people.
Yeah.
When it fights the everything is for everybody thing.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? Like, at some point, everything is not for everybody. Right. Yeah, that's tough. That's tough. That's a tough pill to swallow.